Needless to say, this is totally expected on my part. I'd just like to say that I sort of got a break on that show because of Lorne Michaels. There is a cast of not ready for primetime players, all of whom are awful good, and it's been great working with them. And I also would like to thank Ernie Kovacs. I swear, Ernie Kovacs I'd like to thank, and Lorne Michaels. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Pop. I'm your host, Greg May, and this is episode 4 of Vintage Pop. And if this is your first time listening to our show, welcome. I'll tell you, Vintage Pop is a podcast hosted by me. The show is dedicated to bringing you the stuff you missed from yesterday from someone who was not there for it the first time around. And it's a fun and informative look into the pop culture of yesterday, movies, books, music, and TV, and some products about the all different eras will be talked about on this show. As always, we're open to your suggestions to keep the conversation going, and you can do that by emailing us at vintagepopcast@gmail.com. You can always reach us at vintagepop on Twitter, and you can also comment on our blog page at vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. A couple of updates since the last show. You may know already that we are on Podbean and iTunes, but we are also on Stitcher. I'm not positive if I said that on the last show, but if so, I'll be repeating myself. It is Stitcher. We are on Stitcher right now. You can go on their website and search Vintage Pop. Also, when I post a link each week, either if you follow us on Twitter or the feed directly, you can go on libsyn.com and get the podcast feed through that as well. If you have an Android phone and you like to use a different podcast client, you'd like to reach us a different way other than iTunes. I will say, even if you're not a big iTunes user, if you could please get on there and leave us a rating and a review, because that'll really help with the growth of the show, honestly. As long as we can get more growth and maybe get into new and noteworthy, maybe I can get some more listeners and help me have a conversation about these vintage items. So we got the blog page out of the way. Also, we have an Amazon search bar. I know I say this every show, but if you could go to vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com and add us to your bookmarks bar when you do your Amazon shopping, if you could type it into our Amazon search bar, you get a couple of cents per sale, so it really helps the upkeep of the show, keeps the lights on. And I'll have some events later on in the program, but I guess we'll get right down to it. I was thinking about what I was going to call the show today, because if you've been listening, you know that this week I was going to do a show on Ernie Kovacs. And hopefully you did your research and did your homework, but if not, I will inform you on who he is and what he did for the television industry. He was really a pioneer in television, and that was the key word that I had in my brain at that point. And I said, well, he's a pioneer in television. And then to fill time, I thought, well, maybe we should do another host as well. So if you are familiar with him, great. If not, this might be new to you as well. We'll be talking about Joe Franklin as well. And Joe Franklin was a guy who hosted a television program in New York for over 35 years called The Joe Franklin Show. And it's similar to a talk show just like Dick Cavett or even maybe like a small-scale Tonight Show. But Joe Franklin would have performers, singers, actors, writers, big and small in celebrity size, come onto the program and have a conversation with him. And it was broadcasted mainly to New York residents, maybe some in the North Jersey area. So depending where you are geographically, you may know who Joe Franklin is, you may not. But there is some very awesome footage left over on the internet that you can check out and that I will leave in the show notes so that you can check out. Along with the Ernie Kovacs segment, what a really large thing that goes with it is that I wanted to talk about the Shout Factory box set that came out called the Ernie Kovacs Collection, which I did receive for Christmas, and it's a wonderful box set. I'm still making my way through it. There's tons of content, but there is a booklet. I'd like to read some of the booklet out on the show to kind of give you an idea of how this set was made. It's really interesting because this footage is taken from a time in television that there was no VHS or Betacam recordings. This was just things that were broadcasted live, and if they were preserved through things called kinescopes, which is basically taking a camera and facing it directly to a television and filming it that way. So this set is mainly, actually, I would argue to say probably 100% made out of kinescopes, and that's really interesting. Looking forward, I was not sure exactly what I was going to do looking forward, but I know we always kind of clue you in. I actually got a message from Dan, actually, who gave us an email on his thoughts about the Evel Knievel show a couple weeks ago, and he sent me a link to a documentary that's on Amazon right now about the vintage drive-ins and memories about that. So maybe we'll do a segment on that program looking forward. As always, like I said in the beginning of the show, I'd love for anybody to participate in the conversation. I think it's great that a lot of my friends and stuff have been kind of giving their 2 cents and telling me what they would like to hear and talk about. But, you know, that's all fine and good. But I'd also like to get some people from the outside looking in on the program to give their suggestions and what do they want to hear and what do they want us to talk about. And like I said, the biggest way that you can do that is get into contact with us through email at vintagepopcast@gmail.com. It's funny, I actually, at the end of every show, I tell what's going on as far as events and how we can meet up and talk about vintage things. And both the events that happened last week, I did not even go to. And I apologize if you did. There was the VHS swap at Tattooed Moms that I was supposed to go to, and I just did not make it. Also, the program, the whole reason I delayed this Ernie Kovacs program was because of the tribute show that they were going to have at the International House in University City in Philadelphia. I was not even able to make that as well. Unfortunately, something came up. Like I said before, working and having this class and whatnot has really tested my diligence with actually doing this show, and I want to make sure that I have the most prepared show for you as possible, and that's why sometimes I have to skip some things to be more prepared in other ways so that I can do this show. And it's just something that I'm enjoying, that I'm continuing. I was taking a look at the statistics, and they are small, but, you know, it does show that there is steady listenership. This will be our 4th show when it comes out, which means I've been doing the show for about a month. It seems that, and it's as laughably small as this may seem, we do have 17 consistent listeners. The first show had 44 listeners, the second show had 17, and we rounded out episode 3 with 17 downloads as well. Now, that is just subscriptions and direct downloads. I don't know how many people are streaming the show, but it is exciting to even see that there's consistent listenership. If I had 5 listeners, I would still do this show, just because it's a forum where I can sit down and talk and maybe inform you on things that you may not have ever thought to look into or never knew that even existed, and that's what's really great about this show. So here's what we're going to do. We'll take our first break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Ernie Kovacs and the Ernie Kovacs Collection box set. After that, we'll move on and talk about Joe Franklin. And then to close out the show, as always, I'll give you some updates on what's been going on with me, as well as some future events in the area. The Secret Cinema event that will be taking place this Thursday on March 8th at the Rotunda has been announced. It has to do with old newsreel footage and stuff like that. Should be fun. I will tell you about that in just a little bit. So we'll go off to our first break. We'll come back and talk about Ernie Kovacs right here on Vintage Pop.
Show starts in 7 minutes.
Ernie, I'm glad to see you. Huh? This is Mr. Gorin, Mr. Kovacs.
I never thought I'd have the honor of having such a distinguished stand-in.
Miss Pelkey. Miss Pelkey, Mr. Kovacs. And Mr. Fenneman.
Never mind Fenneman.
Okay, well, I'll mind Fenneman. You watch.
Thank you.
Now, you selected as your category hieroglyphics. Is that right?
What? I was sitting up there. I don't know.
Your partner here selected Mother Goose Rhymes. She figured this would be something that... You have children, haven't you?
After they see this, I may embarrass them terribly.
No, but when you smoke that half down, would you give me the rest?
I gave you the other one, remember?
Welcome back to Vintage Pop, and the first thing that we're going to talk about actually is Ernie Kovacs' life and career, and I also wanted to give you my thoughts on the Ernie Kovacs Collection box set that Shout Factory has put out, and of course I will leave a link for that box set. I was going to do it last week, but I thought it would pertain more if we were actually doing a show on Ernie, and this week we are, so you definitely want to check that out. I mean, quick hot take on the box set before I really get into it. It's definitely worth it. If you have any interest on Ernie or what his career was like or what type of television he was doing, then you're going to want to check out this box set. So, I mean, what made me interested in Ernie Kovacs? I mean, I'm here to tell you about it and why you should do it, but you're probably wondering, like, what is it that made me want to look into Ernie Kovacs? Well, I mean, I said in the first show, I went to Rowan University for my degree. I have a degree in radio, television, and film production, and we took a lot of television history classes, and one of the classes we took was television history of the 40s and 50s. So I did say that Vintage Pop, the scope would be wide, and it definitely is. So the thing about Ernie Kovacs is that he was one of these early pioneers in television. And the thing is, in the 1940s, when television was young, the technology for TV was created by the late 30s, but was not really commercially available for people until the 40s. Well, they didn't really know what they were going to put on television. I mean, it's kind of like the early, it alludes very similar to the beginning of pay TV, things like HBO and Cinemax. Okay, let's put movies on the air, but what are we going to fill the time with other than movies? Now, you see that they do have original programming and stuff now, but there were things like the Pennsylvania Polka competition that they would put on HBO in the 70s, in the very early stages of it. And I would love to actually see footage of that. So side note, if any of you out there have any old HBO events from the 70s saved on beta, VHS, or anything like that, or you have it digitized now, please get in contact me by email. vintagepop@gmail.com. So I'm getting away from myself, but the thing is, it's very similar to how television was back then in the 40s, and the thing about the 40s is, I mean, they didn't quite know what to do at all. There's, of course, now looking back on television history, there was the beginnings of cooking shows and talk shows and chat shows and live remotes from maybe like auto programs and your news broadcasts. But primarily, the television was the Wild West back then. So that's why I wanted to get into talking about these television pioneers, if you will. And Ernie Kovacs is definitely a television pioneer. He was a man who hosted many different programs on television, starting in the Philadelphia area. And it's just a coincidence that he actually lived and performed in this area. I know some of the things that I talk about are Philadelphia centric, but in this case specifically, Ernie Kovacs was born in Trenton, New Jersey. So naturally, one of his first television stops would be Philadelphia. So we'll get right into him. And Ernie Kovacs, who his full name was Ernest Edward Ernie Kovacs, was born January 23rd, 1919. He was an American comedian, actor, and writer. His television programs were considered visually experimental and often spontaneous in comedic style, and influenced numerous television comedy programs for years, even after his death. He and his wife received many Emmy nominations for best performances in comedy series during 1957, but his talent wasn't really recognized until his death. Some of his antics include having pet marmosets on stage, wrestling a jaguar on his live Philadelphia television show. So we'll get into it a little bit. In his early life, his father emigrated from Hungary in 13. He worked as a policeman, restaurateur, bootlegger, and they actually wound up being pretty decently well off for a little while. So more about Ernie. He was not exactly the best student in Trenton Central High School where he went, but he was influenced by his drama teacher, and he received an acting scholarship from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in 1937. So he was getting his acting chops going, and in 1938 there's actually a photograph that shows Kovacs as a member of the Prospect Players, and he did not have what you would know, and once you see it, as his trademark mustache yet. So we'll fast forward to his first acting job, or actually paid entertainment job. So his first paid entertainment work was during 1941 as an announcer for Trenton radio station WTTM. He spent the next 9 years with WTTM, and he became the station's first director of special events. And in this job, he did things like see what it was like to be run over by a train, but leaving the tracks at the last minute. He broadcasted from the cockpit of a plane, for which he took flying lessons, and he also was involved with local theater, a local newspaper, and after some time, that article actually was changed in 1945, and it was named Kovacs Unlimited. So he gets his start in television in 1950 at the NBC Philadelphia affiliate, WPTZ. He auditioned by wearing a barrel and shorts. His first show was called Pick Your Ideal, and it was a fashion and promotional program for the Ideal Manufacturing Company. Before long, he was hosting a cooking show, Deadline for Dinner and Now You're Cooking, which featured advice from local chefs. After a while hosting these shows, he started to gain some success, and this resulted in him beginning to host a program named 3 to Get Ready, named for WPTZ's Channel 3 spot on television dials, which you may now know if you live in the Philadelphia area as CBS 3. In 1950, 3 to Get Ready was innovative because it was the first regularly scheduled early morning show, which ran from 7 to 9 a.m. in a major television market, and it predated NBC Today by more than a year. Prior to this, it was assumed that people were not watching TV at such an early hour. We do know now that so many people watch television, and while the show did early morning news and weather, Kovacs provided this and more in an original manner. When rain was in the forecast, he would get on a ladder and pour water down on the staff member reading their report. He would also go outside of the studio for some of his skits, running through a downtown Philadelphia restaurant in a gorilla suit and looking into a construction pit, saying it was deep enough to see China. So he would do all kinds of these different shows, and around 1952 he started doing a late morning show for WPTZ called Kovacs on the Corner, where he would walk through an imaginary neighborhood talking with various characters such as Pete the Cop and Luigi the Barber. This was more of a children type of show, which is also actually included on the box set, that you could actually see 2 episodes of Kovacs on the Corner. As time went on, he had one final show, Kovacs Unlimited, that ran, this is in his early days of television, from 1952, April 21st of 1952 to January 15th, 1954, which was Kovacs Unlimited. It was Ernie's daily show for CBS, which he moved from CBS after NBC, and it started at a midday slot of 45 minutes and moved to mornings at 1 hour in the beginning of 1953. He transplanted his Philly wake-up show to New York City. It was now seen by a national audience at this point. This show allowed Kovacs a chance to hone his writing now that he didn't have to fill 2 hours every day. And in the box set, there is actually an episode from May 28, 1952. It's the only existent kinescope from the show's 21-month run, and its first 15 minutes are missing. But I did see it. It is actually a pretty funny show. He moved on to NBC again in 1955 and 56 because Kovacs Unlimited was canceled. He did a similar late-night program for the Dumont Network. And if you don't know what the Dumont Network is, Dumont was before, so now there are still 3 networks. There's, well, 4 networks. There's ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox. Back then, there was only NBC, CBS, and ABC. But there was the original 4th network, which was known as Dumont. The Dumont Network actually had some things like the Honeymooners before they started. Jackie Gleason was one of the first people on Dumont. We could actually do a whole show on Dumont at some point. I have a book about Dumont that I have yet to read. Maybe I'll actually get onto that, and maybe in the next coming weeks we can do a show on the Dumont Network. But anyway, he did a brief stint on the Dumont Network. Dumont actually made televisions, and that's how they got their investment capital to start their own network. It only lasted for a couple of years. It could not compete with some of the bigger networks, and the bigger networks were taking their stars away from them. But in any event, Ernie worked for the Dumont Network at some point, but at that point, after that was over, from April 1954 to 55, he comes to NBC again in New York in December 12th of 1955 to host the Ernie Kovacs Show, which ran until July 27th, 1956. Notable from that, his announcer, Bill Wendell, who later actually worked for David Letterman from 1982 to 1995. If you don't have the set, or if you're not going to get the set, I can tell you the set looked like actually dungeon-like. It had a knight in shining armor. and it was kind of looked like a castle in his set, and it was supposed to look like he wanted it to show that it was being hosted from Ernie's own den. Some of the segments in that actually look kind of childlike. He does a space puppet show called Kaputska in Space, which I always thought was actually pretty funny, and he does some skits with his then wife at the time, Edie Adams. The Kovacs show went to evenings in 1956 from July 2nd to September 10th, which was a similar format to his evening show, but his daytime show, I apologize, but it was a lot like the daytime show. In the late 50s, he did the Saturday Color Carnival, the Ernie Kovacs show, nicknamed The Silent Show. It was a 30-minute program that was a turning point in his career and his television work. In the program Ernie created, he had no dialogue at all except for Ernie's spoken introduction, and it became an instant classic, landing him on the cover of Life magazine on April 15th, 1957, and with a four-year contract with Columbia Pictures, given complete creative control and the opportunity to do a program without a pre-existing format, and the show is Kovacs television humor in its purest form. In 1959, he did a show for NBC called Kovacs on Music, and another one for ABC called Take a Good Look. He did a variety of different specials for ABC in the early 60s, ranging from 1961 in July to December 3rd, 1961. And these are all in the box set that you can check out if you so choose. Over the course of his television career, I saw many cameos that he did, one for the Lucy Desi Comedy Hour, or what was known as We Love Lucy, and I've also seen him on an episode of You Bet Your Life with his wife with Groucho Marx. So unfortunately, Ernie Kovacs was killed prematurely. He was killed in a car accident in Los Angeles during the early morning hours of January 13th, 1962. He worked for most of the evening. He met his wife at a baby shower that was given by Billy Wilder for Milton Berle and his wife, who had recently adopted a new baby. That night, Kovacs lost control of his Chevrolet Corvair station wagon while turning quickly, and he crashed into a power pole at the corner of Beverly Glen and Santa Monica Boulevards. He died at the age of 42. So he was definitely a major landmark in television and influenced so many people, such as Johnny Carson, David Letterman, the show Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, Chevy Chase, Monty Python's Flying Circus, Jim Henson, even things on MTV like Max Headroom. And what's crazy is a lot of people do not know who he is, and this box set gives you the perfect example on who he was and what his shows were like. And he seemed like a very, very nice man from what you could see on television and what I've read about, and very talented and a landmark performer in television in the early days when not much was actually known about it. This collection was actually put together by all the surviving kinescopes that his wife at the time, Edie Adams, had put together. At this time, a lot of people didn't even think that preserving television in that type of form was actually even a good thing to do, or that why would anybody want it? You may have heard, if you're a Tonight Show fan, that some of the earliest programs of Johnny Carson and the Tonight Show were actually dumped into the Hudson River to create space for other things. So she was able to preserve these, but they weren't given to her. She actually had to pay for all of them. Everything that she got from all the networks that actually still had any type of surviving kinescopes, tapes of the Ernie Kovacs show, and that's what this box set is made up of. So it allows you to actually see episodes from his local and national morning shows, episodes from his NBC primetime show, the show Kovacs on Music, 5 ABC TV specials, the color version of his legendary silent show, Eugene, his award-winning commercials for Dutch Masters cigars, include short films, tributes, rarities, and a 44-page book, including rare photos, program notes, and an essay by Jonathan Lethem, who was the author of Motherless Brooklyn. The set contains 6 DVDs and over 13 hours of programs that span his all-too-brief television career. I definitely recommend that if you can pick this up. I will try and find a link for you on Amazon. That's where I got it. It was about $30 to $40. I remember when I got it. but it's definitely worth it. It's a 6 DVD set. You're never going to get anything more like this to actually... I can tell you as much as I want about Ernie Kovacs, but if you really want to explore this more and check it out yourself, you definitely owe it to yourself to pick up this box set. So that's all we've got on Ernie Kovacs. We'll take a quick break. When we return, I'll tell you a little bit about Joe Franklin, and then before we go, I'll tell you what's been going on with myself and some events coming up in the next few days right here on Vintage Pop.
Black Sheep Squadron, Pappy's burly chief mechanic goes on a rampage. He's gone crazy! Robert Conrad stars as Pappy. Then, on Policewoman, Pepper is stalked by a mysterious phantom. Angie Dickinson and Earl Holliman star. First, Black Sheep Squadron, then Policewoman. Wednesday, starting at 9, 8 Central and Mountain Time on NBC.
Tab, what a beautiful drink. Tab, for beautiful people. Tab. 16 ounces have just 1 calorie. Tab, what a beautiful drink. Tab, for beautiful people. Tab, it's beautiful to be. Tasting so darn good.
Welcome back to Vintage Pop. I'm your host, Greg May, and we are back with our program on pioneers of television, and the second person that I actually wanted to talk about was Joe Franklin. Now, Joe Franklin, like I was talking about in the beginning of the show, is actually more of a New York-centric television host, personality, author, and actor who lived his entire life in the New York City area, actually New York City proper. I'm trying to think when I first heard about Joe Franklin. And it might have been the movie Broadway Danny Rose. Actually, I might be wrong about that, but he is in Broadway Danny Rose, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. I feel like I came across him some way when I was looking up interviews of celebrities. I watch a lot of vintage television on YouTube, and not just things like Dick Van Dyke or anything, or Kojak, but I also enjoy watching vintage talk shows or chat shows, stuff like the Dick Cavett Show, which they actually run on Decades, if you get that channel, as well as I like watching old Johnny Carson shows on late night on Antenna TV. If I look up interviews about certain actors or actresses, I think I came across Joe Franklin. Actually, I know exactly how I came about Joe Franklin. If you've ever heard of the actor Joe Spinell, who plays Mr. Gazzo on in the first 2 Rocky movies, it's the guy that Rocky works for down on the docks, is the actor Joe Spinell. He also starred in he had a role. I don't know why I should say star, but he had a role in The Godfather. In The Godfather Part 1 and 2, he was Willie Chi-Chi. In the second film, he has a more prominent role where he's actually at the Senate hearing with Frank Pantangeli and testifying against Michael Corleone. So you notice him from those movies. He also did the 1980 horror film Maniac with William Lustig, and that's definitely a scary one. So I was actually looking up interviews of Joe Spinell for some reason, because I wanted to see if he ever did any talk shows. And in fact, he did the Joe Franklin Show, which makes sense because it's a very New York-centric show. And I found all these new programs about Joe Franklin and never knew how big of a deal he was in New York City. And I guess if you don't live in New York City, you really have no idea who this guy is, and so I wanted to tell you a little bit about him. So Joe Franklin was born Joseph Fortgang in March 9th, 1926. He was an American radio and television host, personality, author, and actor from New York City. His first show began in January 1951 on WJZ-TV, which was later moved to WABC-TV, and then moved to WOR-TV, later WWOR-TV from 1962 to 1993, which is the program that I actually saw. So at 14, Joe Franklin began writing skits for the Kate Smith Hour, and I believe Kate Smith is actually the woman who sung the, she was the one that sung the national anthem for the Flyers games. So in way back when. So if you're a Flyers fan, you definitely probably know who Kate Smith is. And at 16, Franklin officially began his entertainment career as a record picker on a radio sensation, Martin Block's Make Believe Ballroom, where he became known as the young wreck with the old records. And so I guess he might as well have been just a DJ at that point. But by that time, he was 21. He embarked on a radio career. He was also considered to be an authority on popular culture of the first half of the 20th century, including silent films. He was called the King of Nostalgia and the Wizard of Was for focusing on old-time show business personalities. He was also a pioneer in promoting products such as Hoffman Beverages and Canada Dry Ginger Ale, and the A&E documentary, which I did not even know existed, but I will try and seek that out for you. It's called It's Only Talk, the Real Story of America's Talk Shows, credits Franklin as the creator of the television talk show. He was listed in the Guinness World Records as the longest-running continuous on-air TV talk show host, more than a decade longer than Johnny Carson's run. Once he retired from television in 1993, he concentrated on his overnight radio show, and he played old records on WOR-AM on Saturday evenings. Kind of like myself, I actually host a oldies program. And quick plug, Saturdays, one Saturday a month. My next one will be Saturday the 17th on St. Patrick's Day on 89.7 WGLS FM, also online at wgls.rowan.edu. Anyway, Saturday evenings, he would do this show on WOR-AM and mentored thousands of aspiring entertainers who for decades sought an audience with him at his notoriously cluttered Times Square office. And I will post a video so you can see what this office looks like. When they say cluttered, it's very, very cluttered. His celebrity interviews, known as Nostalgia Moments, appeared daily on the Bloomberg radio network until mid-January 2015, shortly before his death. So Joe died January 24th, 2015 at the age of 88 of prostate cancer, but he was definitely a landmark in television. He interviewed great celebrities such as Jane Mansfield, the Beastie Boys, Cary Grant, Andy Warhol, Salvador Dali, Rudy Vallee, Jimmy Durante, Madonna, John Lennon, Woody Allen, Barbra Streisand, Julia Roberts. They all got their first television exposure on the Joe Franklin Show. Frank Sinatra reportedly actually appeared 4 times. And so it's really amazing to see that all these people actually made their stop at the Joe Franklin Show. And what's funny is once you learn about Joe Franklin, once you notice who he is and what he was and what he did and how big he was to the New York area, he was actually in 2 films that I have noticed, Ghostbusters and Broadway Danny Rose, which is what explains why I thought I may have seen him in Broadway Danny Rose. There's actually a really funny skit where Billy Crystal parodied him during the 1984-1985 season of Saturday Night Live. I will put that in the show notes so you can check that out. And in 1997, he was profiled in the documentary film 50 Million Joe Franklin Fans Can't Be Wrong, which I believe is actually on YouTube. I'll try and make a note of that as well. He has many books if you want to look him up. He's, like I said, an authority on nostalgia. And you can definitely tell that from some of the programs that you can watch of his that are on YouTube. There's actually a Joe Franklin Show YouTube channel, which I will also make a note to show you in the show notes when I'm done with the program for today. I always like to write down all these different links so that you can kind of get a taste of what these things are like, and then kind of, as I like to go say about myself, is either go in the Wikipedia wormhole or the YouTube black hole or wormhole and get lost in just looking up these things and learning more and more about them. And it's fun because these 2 people that we talked about, especially Ernie Kovacs and now Joe Franklin, were just landmarks for their time in the talk show era, in the, I guess, comedy and variety morning show type era in the case of Kovacs. And it's just amazing to see that these people did so much for television. Now you can celebrate them through either by watching videos of them on the internet or getting this Ernie Kovacs box set, so really great things to check out and really great topics for today. We'll take one final break. When we come back, I'll tell you what's been going on with myself, and we'll wrap up the show with some future events right here on Vintage Pop.
It's not too sweet. It's refreshing, crisp, and neat. Canada Dry Ginger Ale is not too sweet.
It's not too sweet. I repeat, it's not too sweet. Canada Dry cools your thirst. It's a taste that can't be beat.
It's not too sweet. It's a cool, refreshing treat. Canada Dry Ginger Ale, it's not too sweet.
Regular or diet, it's more refreshing because it's not too sweet.
welcome back to Vintage Pop. And as always, before we go, I like to tell you a little bit of update of what's going on with my collections or things that I've been doing, as well as some upcoming events that are going to be coming up in the Philadelphia area. As I said, if you have any local events going on in your area that kind of fit the format of what I've been talking about, vintage television, vintage film, vintage products, vintage conventions, please tell me about them. You can email me them at vintagepopcast@gmail.com, and I can put them on our blog page at vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. So some stuff that's going on with me. I'm still trying to get the 16mm collection going. There is the Cineci, the 17th, the Cineci 17, which will be taking place the last weekend of April in Wildwood, New Jersey. I'm going to be going to that. I actually need to book my room this week. It's going to be taking place Friday and Saturday. Those are the two big days. People apparently are starting to get there on Thursdays now to help set up and whatnot. I have never been, so I might go down on Thursday, just maybe try and help out and get things set up and make some new friends in the 16mm hobby. It's all very, very new to me. As I've been saying, I've got two projectors I've had since high school, trying to get them going. Both of them worked for the most part, but they have minor problems. I did meet someone locally who's a collector that is going to take a look. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to take my projector over to him today. I'm going to leave around 2 o'clock and drop off a projector, and we will see where we are with that. I'm hoping he can fix it. I don't want to have to purchase another one, but I will if I have to, because I'm really looking forward to showing family and friends all different things that I can pick up on 16mm, whether they be television shows or feature films or anything of the sort. Out on a screen, maybe outdoors this spring and summer months, and maybe into the fall too. I think it'd be really fun to be able to share some more of this stuff. So far, I actually did, if you remember the General Cinema Corporation, that was around probably since the 60s up until the very early 2000s. If you grew up in the South Jersey area, you might remember the General Cinema 6, which eventually became the AMC Deffert 6. But I remember seeing many great movies there. Point being, I did find a short reel of an intro to previews, coming attractions from General Cinema from about the 1997 to 2003 area. So I'll be looking forward to putting that together in a reel with some other trailers to create 16mm trailer rails to display coming attractions when I actually start screening some of these movies. Coming up this week, the Secret Cinema event that I was talking about last week, it will be on Wednesday night at the Rotunda on Walnut. It's 4014 Walnut Street, Philadelphia. On Thursday, March 8th, the Secret Cinema will present a retrospective of the March of Time, which was the groundbreaking, influential series of topical newsreels produced under the banner of Time and Life magazines between 1935 and 1951. The March of Time presents fast-moving, concise summations of crucial current events and vivid histories of the facets and trends of life in America. The program will actually be free. There is going to be a variety of topics that are covered, and one 1946 short, Atomic Power, as well as two bonus features that are not March of Time films: an Egyptian Adventure, a rare 1928 documentary that anticipates the March of Time's creative license, and School Time in Camps, a charming Kodachrome short made by the March of Time producers for their Life magazine sponsor, documenting an ambitious program to induce city kids to the wonders of nature. There's going to be one complete screening at 8 p.m. and admission is free. Again, that's at the Rotunda in Philadelphia, 4014 Walnut Street. That's going to be in the University City area of Philadelphia. I'd love to see you there. I don't know if we'll be able to run into each other. The last event was actually pretty full, but I will tell you I will 100% be there and would look forward to meeting you if you were going to come out that way. Again, April 13th, there's going to be a 35mm Italian dub print of the 1977 classic Suspiria, the Dario Argento film, which will be taking place at the Lightbox Film Center April 13th at 7 p.m. You can still get tickets right now if you Google the International House Philadelphia or the Lightbox Film Center. Apparently, it is one of the only prints in existence of this film that has got the Italian dubbing and is still on 35mm. They're going to be English subtitles, so you won't have to worry about knowing what's going on. A lot of the colors that are in Argento's film, especially that one, look great. You can definitely, I implore you, if you live in the Philadelphia area, you definitely need to check this out. Monster Mania is going to be this Saturday, well, actually this Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the Doubletree Hotel, or is that, no, it's the Crown Plaza Hotel. I'll leave a note about this in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm going to be going with a couple friends of mine on Saturday. Maybe we'll run into each other there. Looking forward to that. My friend's going to be meeting Elvira and John Carpenter, and hopefully I can wait in line and actually say hi myself. And so plenty of great stuff to look forward to. As always, I hope to see you at one of these events sometime. Before we close, please, please, please leave us a review and rate us on iTunes. Every little bit helps. Follow us on Twitter at Vintage Popcast. Send us an email at vintagepopcast@gmail.com. We're on Stitcher. I would like to remind you to please, on our blog page, use our Amazon search bar. And again, that's vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. Maybe we will do the drive-in segment like I was talking about next week. If not, who knows, it'll be a surprise. But I really am enjoying this 1 month of Vintage Pop in the books. Thanks to all the listeners. Thank you for keep on listening, keep on downloading, keep on subscribing, and please leave us some reviews. Every little bit helps, and I really appreciate all the support from all the listeners and family and friends that have been listening to the show so far. So I'm your host, Greg May. This is Vintage Pop, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.